Hello everyone, this is StrawberryShorty here with a review of Tales of Zestiria for the PS4. So just to get it out of the way, this is a game about a young man named Saray who has grown up in Elysia surrounded by seraphim, which are magical beings that most people can't see. They're basically the Malachim from Tales of Zestiria, which is one of the only other Tales games I've played. Only modern Tales game I've played. The only other one was Tales of Eternia. And if you saw my review of Tales of Zestiria, you know that I had some mixed feelings about it. In particular, in regards to the battle system. And I even made a comment, because I had started playing Zestiria at that point, that I kind of thought that Zestiria's battle system at the time might very well be worse than Zestiria's. So I had put the game down for a little bit after reaching the, was it Tangel Ruins or something like that. Picked it back up again. That's still pretty early in the game. But so I wanna focus on the battle system for the start of this review. I actually have changed my opinion somewhat, in that I overall do like this battle system better than Zestiria's. The main reason for that is, like, in Zestiria, you could assign 4 moves to each one of the triangle, circle, square, X buttons, and you'd basically just perform combos the more you hit them. And while this was fine for, like, physical attackers, it didn't really work for caster type characters. So in Zestiria, the circle button is just a normal attack button, and you can do a combo attack, and then you assign different arts to the X button. And there's like one you can cast just by pressing X, and then X and pushing the joystick left, X and pushing the joystick right, up, down. So you can, like, equip 5 different arts, and I definitely like that better. Like, I controlled Lila, and I was actually able to fight this time. I believe a lot of other people did not like the battle system, and I do kind of wonder if this way of doing things, while it works for casters, I wonder if it might be the opposite problem that Zestiria had, where it doesn't really work as well for melee attackers. So I'm really interested to hear what people think about that. Now, that's not to say that the combat is perfect. There are a lot of problems. For one thing, movement in battle. And I imagine this is one of the reasons why people that don't like the battle system don't like it. So rather than just running freely around the battlefield, you can only run towards the enemy and away from the enemy. And this doesn't seem to make much sense. It sucks, and it's too easy to basically end up cornered and unable to do anything but let an enemy kick your butt, because you can't run away from them, you can only run backward and forward. There is, like, a thing you can unlock to move freely, but, like, if you use that, it will stop you from regaining SC, which is, like, I think that's the gauge that lets you like use your arts. So I mean, I kept it off, and this ended up becoming, like, a real nuisance also, because there's this one battle partway through the game where instead of fighting, you have to run around the arena and touch things, except you can't run around the arena. And, like, I could see a lot of people completely forgetting that the free running thing exists. I'm not even 100% sure it's actually mentioned in the game, but either way, you can't access the menu where you select it while battling. So I ended up using, like, every single life bottle I had, reviving my characters, and just hoping the enemy would end up in a place where I could back into the things you needed to touch. And that just sucked. I also encountered some kind of a weird, like, glitch where certain characters wouldn't move. Like, I'd be attacking the enemy, and I'm just like, why am I the only one here? Like battles where there's just one enemy. So it's like, I'm here and I'm attacking, I'm alone, like, where are the other characters? And they're just not running in to join the fray, and I don't know why. And I thought at first it might be that I had messed up the battle settings, because the right joystick you can hit to to give different orders, like defend, focus on one enemy, spread out. And it's very easy to kind of hit that without thinking, but that was not the case, so I don't know. And one of the reasons why I kept hitting it by accident is the other biggest problem with the battle system, the camera. I don't know how on earth this happened, but the camera in battles is terrible. And like I'll often have my character near the far edges of the screen so that they can cast as far away from the enemy as possible, and I won't be able to see them because that's just how terrible the camera is. Like, my character will not be visible. Half the time I'll have no idea if they're still casting or what's going on with them. And kind of tying into that, casting times I think are a little ridiculous. Like, it would get really annoying when you'd have like a big swarm of enemies and just your casters could not get a spell off. They would just keep getting attacked. I also found battles to be a little bit repetitive. Like, when I got to the post-game dungeon, I ended up just putting the difficulty on simple, and I'm glad that I did, because battles, it was just enemies with ridiculously large amounts of HP, and me just kind of whittling that HP down, and like, even if the battles themselves weren't tough, it would take forever, even with the simple difficulty on. It just got aggravating. Like, I played the rest of the game on normal, but yeah. Another kind of mixed thing I had, like, one thing in Berseria that drove me crazy was sometimes characters would say things. Like, they'd be saying things before the battle, and then a battle would trigger, and whatever they were saying would get cut off. Or they'd say something at the beginning of the battle, and that would get cut off, like if a character got attacked or something. Here, that doesn't happen, with one exception, and this drives me nuts. Mystic arts. So, yeah, if someone uses a mystic art, dialogue like that will get cut off, which is aggravating. But so will everything else. Like, let's say you're casting a healing spell and it's taken forever and you're just about to get it cast, and then someone uses a mystic art and it's done. You can't, your spell is ended and you have to restart casting it all over again. Or if, like, I casted like a fire attack Lila has that has like this vortex of flame around her, and it just gets started. Someone uses a mystic art, and when the mystic art ends, the attack that I was doing ends as well. So, like, none of that damage got delivered despite doing all that casting time. This was maddening. Like, why would you cut off what every other character is doing in battle? I also had problems where the mystic arts wouldn't trigger, or the wrong one would trigger. Like, if you press R2 while you're... I guess I probably should have explained this. So, you will have 2 human characters in your party, and you can swap out seraphim characters that you can then armatize with. And armatizing is mentioned in Berseria. It's basically where you fuse with them, and you can use, like, super powerful attacks. And so R2 is generally a healing ability, and then R2 plus circle is supposed to be an attack. And I would frequently try to do these mystic art attacks, and they would not work. And when you're armatized, you'll end up spending your little points things that you have to use to do these attacks to heal, because for some reason it will trigger that instead. Or sometimes even vice versa would happen, and I would be trying to heal and I'd trigger an attack, and it was maddening. So, yeah, I really wanted to get that out of there. Throw out a few random things here. First, the opening movie is pretty awesome. They removed the vocals. I have no idea why. Like, I thought we were past doing that. They used to do that with RPGs all the time. They got a new armor system here, where, like, you can fuse armor together and there's like a grid, and I don't know. I could not follow it at all. I kind of hated everything about the armor in this game, because, like, I'd be at, like, the last, like, dungeons and I'm getting this new armor, and, like, it'd be like, oh, this will raise my attack by, like, 100, but it will lower my defense by 200, and it'll lower this by 200, and all of the armor just seemed, like, not just armor, just all the stuff you could equip seemed really kind of, you know, like, balanced really weirdly. So like, I didn't end up changing my equipment as often as I would have liked. Um, Also, while we're talking about equipping stuff, there's not much in the way of costumes in this one either. I'm still less offended than I was by Berseria. Because you can buy costumes for this, but at least they're priced more normally. But yeah, the costumes in this are mostly just color swaps, and they're not even interesting color swaps. It's mostly just like black and white. And then they have a bunch of those freaking music costumes that are supposed to change like the battle themes, and I swear I didn't notice any difference. But anyway, so while we're talking about visual stuff, the game does this weird thing where it will block you from recording and taking screenshots for most of the game. I have no idea why. Like, despite what I said, I think I mentioned this in the Berseria review, I did actually start playing Tales of Vesperia, and it does the same thing, though less often, where it'll just randomly tell me I can't record a certain scene, and I have no idea why, because there's full Let's Plays of that game, but in Zestiria, you couldn't record anything, except like when you went into like these like little mini dungeons called Crucibles, then you could record, and it was so weird. Like, if anyone knows what the heck's up with that, let me know. Like, not like I was trying to record, but sometimes you want to screenshot stuff. So, anyway. Also, there were some frame rate issues I noticed. In particular with, like, enemies on the screen, especially the flying ones. You just see them flying in, like, super slow motion because the game could just not handle them. That was kind of bad. And I wasn't going to mention it, but there are hair clipping issues in this game. I was going to just give it a pass because you know how games are with long hair, but it wasn't even just hair. Like there's a character that has like a long, like, kind of like flag looking thing running down from his shoulders, and that was clipping into his body. Hair clips into everything. There's just way too many clipping issues that for a PS4 game I don't really want to overlook. Also, the walking animation for characters in this, especially when you have to follow them, is hilarious. Like, there's a few times in the game where you have to follow characters, and they have this really weird, stilted walking animation, and I just don't even know. I had to mention it because there's one where it's a bunch of kids, and they're all just walking really, really hilariously, and I could not stop laughing. Let's see what else we got here. The other human character will follow you around, and you can talk to them to get like it's basically a way to keep track of all your side quests and the main story quests. I did like this as a feature. However, there were a few problems. Some side quests would not be on this menu, and other times they would be, but they would not tell you where you needed to go. There was a part in the game where for the story you're talking with a character, and the character's like, okay, let's not do this here, let's go do this over here, and then they walk away. And it's like, where the frick did you go? And this is on like the normal overworld map, and I had no idea where this character went. And the overworld maps in this game are ridiculously huge. And like, I don't mind a map being necessarily big, but I'm talking big, like just gigantic open spaces, and it's really a pain to try and explore this. It takes forever to get anywhere, and I found that just super maddening. They also do a weird thing with the chests, where like there's normal chests you can open, but then there's like bronze, silver, and gold ones that you have to get special keys for, but there's nothing to mark these chests on your map, so by the time you finally get the gold key, you're not going to remember where any of them are. There's also like areas in ruins that you can't access yet because you don't have certain abilities, but again, there's nothing marking that, so how are you going to remember? You know? Another kind of feature, some other features I wish they would have added, when you're trying on accessories, you can't zoom in. So for some of the smaller ones, you can't really see anything, which is kind of aggravating. There's also no way to know about the inskits in this one, because here they have a bunch of different foods you can eat, and sometimes specific foods will trigger the skit, or sometimes it's just sleeping at the inn. So you end up wasting a lot of money. You'll be reloading a lot, and yeah, that just got super frustrating. So now I want to talk about one of my biggest problems with the game, because this drove me nuts. So, shortly after I started playing again, I get to a town and I have a one-on-one fight where they make you control Saray. And this was something that kept aggravating me early on when they kept making you control Saray, but I thought it was just tutorial stuff. So I do the one-on-one fight with this guy. There's a cutscene where I'm back with my party, leave the town, save the game, run into an enemy, and my party is made up of completely different characters, and I'm controlling a character different from the one I had been controlling, which is Lila. And at first I just thought this was a really annoying, like, specific scene thing. Like, oh, well, the party was just Saray for this one fight, and for some reason it didn't remember who I had in my party and who I was controlling afterwards. But it kept happening throughout the game, and, like, I don't even know how to word this, because it's so random. Like, I get a cutscene where a character, like, runs up and stops an attack. And then the battle starts and suddenly that character is in my party, even though they were on the sidelines, and I have to run around switching everyone up. And this is constant. Constantly a cutscene will happen and your characters get switched around, who you're controlling gets switched around, and it's so aggravating. I cannot put it into words. And it's like, I don't know why they did this. It's just, you constantly have to be on the lookout for it. So, pretty much all I have to say about gameplay and battle and whatnot, I think. I actually made notes this time so I could keep track of everything, because you know how RPGs are, they're a lot longer. So, let's go to story. So, in terms of, like, characters, I like our main character, I like his best friend, Mikleo, I like Delilah. Then you have the other characters, the other playable characters. And there's this character named Edna, where I don't think she's a terrible character. I just... There's like a scene that I got shortly after I restarted playing the game, where she gets, like, knocked over by a bird, and it's really random and out of nowhere. But my first thought when this scene happened was, oh yeah, Edna exists. Because you could literally take her sprite out of the game, take all of her dialogue out of the game, and 99% of it would not change. And there was one other character that I felt this way about before they had, like, one scene that they were super important in. And I just kept thinking, these two characters in particular are poorly executed. But I think this was kind of a running problem with this game. Like, not a lot happens. There's no real character arcs for most of these people. Like, I liked the relationship between Saray and Mikleo and whatnot, but they don't have enough going on here, and nothing makes sense. And I remember a few moments in Berseria when I had no idea what was happening, and it was only reading the little story synopsis I figured it out. But that happened way more often here because the cutscenes would not convey what they intended them to. And that's not good. So I'll just basically go over my notes here. I'll talk the most about the story in the spoiler section. So they have a few choices you can make in this game. Very few of them, I don't know why they're even there, because they are completely meaningless. They do not affect anything in the story. At most, maybe you will get a single line of dialogue. The outcome will always be the same. There was one in particular side quest involving going to, I think it was Lastenbell, a town called Lastenbell, to try and figure out, like, what was going on there. Because you meet a seraphim that had been watching over the town but doesn't want to go back. And I'm only mentioning these details so you don't run into the glitch I did. So you can travel via warping through save points. So I warped back to the inn in town, and they start talking about, like, if you talk to the one woman in the inn, she mentions this little girl named Margaret is missing. And I chose to save and stay at the inn to see if, like, any cutscenes would trigger, and instead, like, any skits would trigger, and instead I ended up triggering something else entirely. Like a scene from the side quest, and they're talking about what happened to Margaret and how we have to find her, but they're mentioning stuff that I haven't learned yet. So you're supposed to actually talk to people outside the inn first. And if you teleport into the inn and talk to that woman, it messes up the order of events, and it was a problem. It was very confusing. Also, there was a side quest, no, not a side quest, that was a story thing, involving this Pope guy. And first, I have to state, this dude, his voice, he sounds like Yami Yugi from Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged. I could not get over that. And this kind of led into another issue, which is, despite the main character being like a very kind and helpful person, there was a lot of ignoring problems. Like, we'd be encountered by a situation where I would feel like we really should probably do something about this or mention this. And again, I'll talk more about this in the spoiler section, but we wouldn't. And it would just seem kind of weird. There were what felt like side quests that kind of got dropped off and never touched upon again. And just, like the villains have no real backstory except for the main one. And it's like, it seems like something really awful happened to this one character in their past, but the game doesn't elaborate on it at all. And, like, apparently that character's backstory is in some sort of special guidebook that got released. And I know a similar guidebook got released for Berseria, but at least in Berseria, I think most of the stuff in that book was, like, epilogue type stuff. Like, this is what happened to this character after the game ended. And so there's also DLC. I did not buy the DLC. I watched a Let's Play because $10.99. I know, yeah, I should probably mention Alicia. So the DLC centers around a character called Alicia, and apparently there was some big controversy because when the game was first released, they made it seem like she was going to be a main character, and then she wasn't. And then they give you this super expensive DLC if you want to play as her, which is kind of ridiculous. I never thought she was going to be a main character, just from the anime intro, but I can see why people would be annoyed, especially since she is playable for a time. And, like, if you know, got used to playing as her and you put the stat increasing stuff on her that's permanent, I could see why that would be annoying. Yeah, I'll talk a bit more about the DLC from the spoiler section. I don't think it's worth $10, and the way one of the characters acts is just pretty nasty. Also, while I'm talking about the DLC, there's free DLC skits, but they're located in the item menu where they're kind of hard to find. And whenever you view one, it will cut back to, like, the main game, so you'll have to re-enter the menu, re-enter the item section, scroll back over to the DLC, and then scroll through the skits to find one you haven't watched yet, and that got really frustrating. So, I didn't hate the game, I don't regret playing it, but yeah, the execution was not great at times. I'm curious to see how Zestiria will compare. I do know Zestiria's story, but oddly enough, I'm having the same feeling about the battle system that I initially had about Zestiria's, which I kind of think it's worse, but we'll see. I'm also planning to watch the Zestiria anime. I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out, because I think it changes some things. But anyway, we'll talk a bit about spoilers. I don't know that I have too much to say, but I guess I'll start with the villains. So, like, Heldolf does not show up enough for me to actually care about him one way or the other. Same thing with all the villains, really. And then, like Simone is one of the ones where you don't really learn her backstory, and apparently she has a backstory that I think connects to, like, the two Medusa side bosses you can fight. And it's frustrating because when I fought them, I wanted to know more about them and more about their past, and all they mention is, like, everyone in the village fell asleep and died, and it's like, is that it? Like what happened to Horsa? What happened to the child that the one lady was pregnant with? But they don't bother to explain that, and just none of it's touched upon in game. And then the Lady Meltron is a bad guy, and she was a good guy. So her betrayal doesn't really do much to us because she wasn't a character we interacted with, and since Alicia wasn't in our party, because Alicia was, like, really attached to her, it just didn't really, like, I wasn't super affected by this, but I was curious why she decided to side with the bad guys, and the game doesn't mention it. The most you get is, I think there's like a side quest where a man mentions that he saw her being devoured by her own soldiers after they became Hellions. But it's like, that's it? We don't really learn what made her decide anything. I think it would have been kind of cool if, like, she was attacked, like, literally attacked, like, out of jealousy and left to die instead of the whole Hellions aspect. And that just kind of soured her. They could have made that a real interesting tie-in with Alicia, too, because Alicia's whole thing is that she's naive and always tries to do the right thing even though she's hated. And they could have made Maltran kind of mirror that, ending with her being betrayed and sort of killed, but becoming a Hellion and just filled with, anger and grief. But they don't, and she just joins the bad guy because, whatever. And there's also Lunar, who I constantly forget exists because I don't care about him. He's not an interesting character. And I don't really have super organized thoughts on the story. There's this part where they take you back to the start of it all, and this is supposed to be like a long time ago. The game always makes it seem that way, but it's like, oh no, it was actually like 16 years ago. And they have this character that's Miklio's mother, and it's like, Miklio must have realized because they look so similar, and it's like, do they? Because we don't see any close-ups of this woman ourselves, and the whole thing is in sepia, so like, we can't see that she looks anything like him. And it's just this whole random thing where they find another baby, and that baby is Saray, and the previous shepherd murders baby Miklio, who gets reborn as a seraph. And again, the cutscene does not convey any of that. I had to read the story synopsis to know what was happening. Same thing with when Alicia is making Saray blind because of her low resonance. I had no freaking idea that was what was happening in that scene. So, yeah, it was just kind of slowly driving me crazy. Also, I just want to throw out that I beat the dragon zombie, which I believe is Silva, because that was a freaking insanely hard fight. And yeah, I want that to be known. It swapped my party out before that fight too, but I ended up sticking with Miklio, because fusing with him and then just constantly attacking the enemy and then using the healing skill was a great way to save items. I still needed like a bunch of elixirs, but using the elixirs didn't help because my characters wouldn't use their mystic arts. So yeah, like the characters I wasn't controlling would not freaking use mystic arts to attack this freaking dragon, and it was driving me insane. But anyway, so I guess I'll talk a bit about the DLC. I do want to go over some story moments I like, but I want to talk about the DLC and get that out of the way. So the whole game ends with like Saray going into like a deep sleep that he'll probably be in for centuries, which means that Alicia's probably never going to see him again, but she doesn't know this. So when she runs into Rose, she tries to ask her about Saray, and Rose doesn't tell her. And there's actually a skit that you can find, one of the free skits that does kind of explain this a bit, that basically Rose doesn't want to tell her because she doesn't want Alicia to get disheartened, even though this is the whole thing we went with Maltran, and I hated that the game didn't let us tell her. When we learned that Maltran was a bad guy, we hide it from Alicia, despite knowing she plans to use Alicia, and it's like, this is a terrible idea. Like, we should really tell her before she finds out some other way or gets hurt or whatever. But so we're keeping things from her again, and I don't feel this suits Rose either. It also doesn't make much sense because, like, Saray isn't dead. Like, yeah, it sucks that you're probably not going to be able to live to see him again, but, like Rose doesn't lie, per se. She never says, oh, well, Saray's off doing something else. She's like, I'm not going to tell you where Saray is. And it's like, Alicia's not stupid. Like, what do you think she's going to assume? She's going to assume he's dead, which is far worse than what actually happened. And then that will make her depressed and disheartened. And when Alicia keeps persisting because she wants to know, because of course she does, Rose gets real nasty and basically insists that they're not friends, they were never friends. And I could maybe have forgiven this if this was how she truly felt, which doesn't seem to be the case, because they really didn't interact much in the story, so that would actually be a somewhat understandable way for her to feel, but it feels more like she's saying it just to kind of chase Alicia away. And it's like, I hate that whole hurt them because you care about them thing, I really do not like that. 9 times out of 10, I think it's stupid and broken logic. Because, like, you're telling her you're not her friend, and this is a girl who has been alone for most of her life, and probably one of the first people she considers a friend, and you're telling her you're not, and it's like, I thought your whole goal here was to not make her depressed. So you're saying something that's going to make her depressed to avoid making her depressed? And I also relate to that, because I've had people do that to me, where I thought they were friends and knew them for a long time, and they said they weren't. It really hurts, especially if you do not have a lot of friends like Alicia. So yeah, that sucked. And the DLC, like, I mean, I guess it's nice closure for Alicia, where she kind of comes to her own conclusion about what she wants to do in the future. And I kind of ship her with Sergei, by the way. I ship Sergei with Mikleo. I don't care what anyone says, it's totally canon. But anyway, I will say there was a scene I really liked in the DLC, which is the scene where Simone uses her illusion power to make Alicia relive the moment Maltron died. And I like how, rather than allowing Maltron to impale herself on Alicia's spear, Alicia kills the illusion, copies what she said, and then thanks Simone for helping her, like, make things right. And I thought that was a really good scene. Another scene I really liked from the ending of the main game is the scene where Mikleo and Saray armatize to basically kill their grandfather, who held off as absorbed. I thought that was a really, really great scene, really emotional, and just super epic. Also, kind of a more minor scene, but I love the skit where Zavid tries to get the boys to go into the sauna to spy on the girls, and it just cuts to him sitting there trying to use his power to peep on them while the boys are just talking about the history of saunas. I love those two so much. Like, they alone make me glad I played this game. But yeah, so I don't know that there's much else to say story-wise. I did remember I wanted to talk about, like, the ignoring problems thing that I mentioned. So, like, when we find, like, the Pope guy, Soray decides, like, okay, we're not going to force him to come back to the church with us. He's happy here. We're just going to leave him here, even though he abandoned his flock and all that. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But it's also revealed that in order to revitalize the village he's been staying at, he's been making this fake elixir and selling it to people. And there's a bunch of problems with this. First of all is that the elixir is being sold for ridiculously high prices, which means that, like, you know, someone might be like, oh, my daughter is dying and we barely have any money, but I'll save up everything I can to buy this elixir to save her life, and then it's not going to save her. So, like, this person's daughter would still die and they would still lose their money. And, like, it's a really horrible thing. Not only that, but the elixir is highly addictive. So you're turning innocent people into addicts, including children. Like, that's horrifying, but we just kind of overlook that. Or there's a moment where we run into some kids who try to rob us because they're like war orphans. And we're just like, okay, you scamps, stop this, and we just leave them. Even though they're children that are robbing people to survive, I feel like we should be doing something to help them. And one of our party members, Rose, you know, she herself as a child was taken in by this like group. And, like, I kind of wish she would have taken these kids in. Instead, we just leave them to the wild, and eventually it ends in tragedy. And this was just, like, a constant problem where we would ignore issues like these. And it just kind of got to me. Also, a bit random to mention here, I wish I'd mentioned it in the non-spoiler section, so I'm probably going to repeat it in the comments, but it was kind of cool seeing, like, locations and stuff and references to Berseria. I don't think there's any preferred order to play these games in, but yeah. So I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I got very rambly when I talked about the story. I only started keeping notes about, like, partway through, so, and they weren't really story notes, they were more like gameplay things I wanted to complain about and story things I wanted to complain about. But yeah, so thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment and let me know what you thought, what your opinions on the games were. A lot of people do not leave comments, and it's kind of disheartening. And thanks to everyone that does. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all next time. Bye.